Hey, welcome to the Bible Book by Book podcast. As a church, we've started a 66-week preaching series, and as part of that, we're going to have a podcast episode every week where we're going to be joined by different people. This week we're in Genesis, and I'm joined by Tom and Emma from our Totton site, so let's talk about Genesis.
I said this before, I want this to be a proper three-way conversation because I've already preached this. And so people have already heard half an hour of me on Genesis.
No one from Hedge End's heard
I'm
you.
privileged to even be part of the conversation.
Well, people have already watched Tom's and commented on it.
Have they?
No.
It's just a lie.
We have already said that this series feels a bit overwhelming, doesn't it? So if other people are feeling overwhelmed, even by the attempt of like first week of Bible reading plan or the workbook or whatever, it's okay, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It is more than okay.
Of course it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's slow and steady, this one, right? We want to get through it. We want to sit through to the end rather than just, using up all our energy week 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Then falling flat on our face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So week 1 being in Genesis, enjoying it so far. We made it this far.
I was surprised by the, not surprised, that's the wrong word, but just the hunger that everyone has got to not just encounter God, which is great and what we want, but also just to learn as well. Like I think the different things that we're doing, just increasing our knowledge of the Bible, increasing our understanding of what's going on. I think that's been quite exciting.
Yeah. Obviously, we focused in on like Abraham and Isaac, didn't we? And that kind of story. And yeah, I think for me, what stood out straight away was this whole call to obedience. So, and the blessings. And so you've got obedience and blessings. Do they go hand in hand? What does that even mean?
Great question, Emma. Chris.
Well deflected.
Yeah. I said I've preached it. I've done my half an hour on.
But Tom, you can't just check out the podcast
I know,
now.
I'm joking.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, the obedience and blessing thing that comes out, I think really struck, even like reading right from the start of Genesis, when you read that the first time that God blesses Adam in the garden, Adam and Eve, he says to them, be blessed and be fruitful and increase in number. And actually the blessing of God is always intended that it's a personal blessing, but then it's a blessing that we would take and sweep others up into that, and that others will be blessed through it too.
Yeah.
And I get your question about obedience and blessing. Just explain what you actually mean by that.
Like, because of Abraham's obedience, the nations were then blessed. And so if there's times, isn't there, when we are obedient to what God's asked of us, but we don't necessarily see the blessing or feel the blessing, or it can be a real painful thing, can't it, to be obedient. And it is whether the two go hand in hand. So if I do everything that God says, and he asks, will my life then be successful? Or, what does blessed look like? What does that word mean? Because I think we can talk about being like, oh, I'm so blessed because I've got my health, or oh, God's blessed me with such a wonderful job, and so culturally, what does being blessed look like? Because the call for Adam and Eve that they were blessed to be a blessing is still the same for us today, isn't it?
Yeah.
But we use that word in such like.
Oh, it's material. It becomes material, doesn't it? It becomes, like you say, there's a massive one about health, right? You look at all the how to be this, how to be the best version of yourself. A lot of that is wrapped up in being physically well and healthy and maximising the potential of your body or whatever. And I think that is such a kind of godless view of what it means to be blessed, because it's about maximising ourselves. Not, you look at actually what Jesus says it means to be blessed in the Sermon on the Mount. It's blessed are you who are poor, blessed are you who are mourning. And it's like, well, how could that person? It seems like a contradiction, but it's like, well, you're blessed when you're mourning because you've got God with you in your mourning. You're blessed when you're poor because you're rich in the things of heaven. I think the Bible comes with a countercultural assumption of what blessing means, doesn't it? But then for Abraham, it did also mean a load of land, a load of descendants and stuff. So there's this.
And he got a son.
Yeah. So there's a twofold thing at play, isn't there? Definitely.
And there's like a heart posture of being full of gratitude for what God has given you. So we can't totally reduce the blessings of what God has given us, and God shows his favour to his people, often by being generous. He's a generous father who loves to give gifts, and so the things that we have, the health that we do have, if we're blessed to have that, is a gift from God. And so we have to have a heart posture of gratitude without assuming that God has given me something because I deserved it in any way, or God has given me something because I merit it, or it's actually just, it's an overflow of the fact that he's an abundantly generous father, anything that we have. And actually what we can sometimes fall into, or sometimes what we can observe in the world around us, is that we can then, obedience to God comes with this sort of, you're already thinking, well, I'll be obedient because then I know that God will bless me. If I tick all these boxes, then I'll be healthy, or then I'll get what I want, or God will bless me with material things. And actually that comes with such an unhelpful heart posture, doesn't it?
Yeah. There's cost associated with obedience, isn't there? Like the obedience attains the blessing, but the obedience is a costly one. And it's like you look at Abraham and like the whole Ishmael saga of like in trying to work things out in his own strength and his own wisdom, he has this other son, and with this other, and just the dynamic that it creates there, like is a heavy thing for him to have to carry, and it causes problems later on in the story when you've now got this kind of broken family, I guess, that's kind of trying to come together and work things out. And obviously there's all sorts of consequences there, but it's not as simple as just blessing doesn't equal simplicity and a simple life and a sort of straightforward life, does it? It's often costly to be obedient to God.
And also I think like Genesis gives us such a big picture and big view of who God is, doesn't it? Like you start in the beginning, God, like creator of everything. And I remember a quote by a preacher, David Devenish, who's visited our church a few times, talking about our culture is obsessed with just individualism and like who am I and what is God's plan for my life and what am I going to do. And actually he was saying, in complete contrast with that, God has a plan for all of the earth, that he would have a people. He has his big macro level plans, and actually we need to find our place within that, and it's not all about us in the first place. So even when we see how God has blessed us, we can make that all about ourselves and our own little lives, but actually God is doing something far bigger than just us personally, individually, but and it's how we find ourselves as part of that big picture of what God is doing.
I think that like one of my questions was, and I drew it as a little table going through the preach, and it is actually if we are blessed so that we might be a blessing to others, where am I blessed, or how am I blessed? And then am I blessing others with that? So it does like, and even then it is hard because that's an individualistic mindset, isn't it? But it is also a call to us in the same way that it was a blessing to Abraham and to Isaac, but it wasn't just for Abraham and Isaac. It was, I
don't think it's individualistic to ask how has God blessed me and how can I bless others. I think you have to do that individually and then in whatever communities you find yourself in, like whether it's your family or in a friendship group or as a church community. We've got to be asking ourselves that question because it applies, doesn't it? Like God might have given me a gift in a certain area or a heart for people, and that is to be outworked in blessing others, isn't it? But then there also might be a sense in which, hey, as a church, we're in a position to, we've been blessed with this resource or this strength, and we've been called to let that overflow into the lives of other people. That's a great question for us to be asking ourselves, isn't it? Like, what has God given me that probably the world would love me to just only think about how that benefits and blesses me, or how it benefits those closest to me, and hey, how let God speak into that. Like, how could that money, for example, like we skirt around money, that is one of the ways God blesses us. Some people have lots of it. How might you use that to be a blessing to others? Or if it is God's given you time, like how can you use that time to further his kingdom and see his gospel be proclaimed to people who don't yet?
Do you ever watch that TV? What's it called? The TV show which shows you people who hoard things in their homes.
Oh,
what's it called?
Stacey Solomon, Sort Your Life Out.
That's one
My
of them.
favourite.
No.
But like you see people who've just accumulated stuff over periods of time and just like cram.
I'm not sure that would be a blessing to anyone else.
cram their houses full of stuff.
Yeah.
And actually, I know it's not quite the same, but actually. When God gives us things, it's often that we would then be generous with what we have, that we would give out, and that we wouldn't just store up for ourselves, but actually that we would give out.
Can't believe Stacey Solomon's got a mention.
Yeah.
Okay.
I despise that TV
I'll hashtag
programme.
her in our podcast, see if she does
See if
anything.
she reposts it.
But is that then where like the obedience comes into it, in that we are blessed so that we can be a blessing, but that's like a character and a heart thing, isn't it? Of like, am I just gonna happily receive what God has given me, or am I gonna share it with others? Like, and I just I'm just trying to think like what, because it's not as I think I saw like on this on the news or something, like an older couple had won like 2 million or 2 billion pounds, and they're like, we're going to find a cure, we're going to donate it to find a cure for the disease that our grandchild died of. And you kind of think, well, of course you do that, I would do that. But when you've not got much money and you somehow get given £10, then there's it, like, to maybe even buy someone flowers, you kind of think they don't really need that. It's quite hard, isn't it, to in those, you can almost use logic in terms of how I can bless others, but then if you hear that still small voice of God prompting you saying, pay for that person's shopping, or I don't know, like you say, it's not just about money and wealth, it's about your time. Like, time can be so precious, and if you're hearing that prompting, how do you then be like, it's the obedient side of that. I find it so interesting in the flip between Abraham and Sarai. Didn't trust, God said, I'm going to provide you with a son. They didn't trust him, and so they took things into their own hands. And then later on in the story, you see Abraham, God says, go up the mountain, sacrifice your son, and he's then trusting, I know that God will provide a replacement in order to save my son. And we don't see that wrestle in the scripture with Abraham in terms of how he trusts God and the obedience, but
he just does.
How do we take this? And
I take a lot of encouragement from I think it says when Isaac's born, it says like God did this at just the right time, and I think like that's God doing things just at the right time, big picture, but also like just the right time for Abraham and Sarah. Like they had been through a season where they tried to do things their own way, and then at just the right time God did what he said he would do, and in between that you get him renewing the covenant again. So it's that, like, again, like a fresh understanding of this is God, this is who God is, this is what I want to do through you, trust me. And it's the kind of gentleness of God that we also, in the midst of a story about child sacrifice, but like it's the gentleness and the kindness of God in him working things out at the right time. And I think that, all right, God doesn't need to renew covenants, but like God comes to us again even when we think, oh, maybe I didn't steward that very well, maybe I didn't, I haven't quite caught hold of what it means to be a blessing, as well as, or be a blessing with what I've been blessed with. God's always on the lookout for opportunities to meet with us and challenge us and change us and make us more like Jesus ultimately. And I think that's the encouraging thing for all of us as we kind of grapple with this. So you take that moment and stop and say, okay, God, are you wanting just to hit pause and get me to think about these things more? And and like we say, it isn't all about money, is it? It's about, like, could I give more time to that person who I know is struggling and who actually kind of annoys me and annoys the people around me, but I've got a free evening once a week that I could give to him instead of playing FIFA all night, or whatever it is. It can be as simple as something like that, can't it? That just is us getting on board with the call to be a blessing.
And often when God calls us to do anything, to do something, like you see it through the Bible, like stories in our own lives, whenever God calls you to do something, it often represents risk and change to what we're used to. And there's a risk element in that, and I haven't done that before. That represents a change to the sort of comfort that I like to surround myself with, and often that's difficult and challenging, isn't it? And I can think back to moments in my own life where you've had to, God's called you to be generous with what you have, to give stuff away. Actually, that represents sacrifice, doesn't it? And that's changing how I've, I don't know, centered what I've built my life to be at this moment, and it represents risk and change for me. But it's in that trust and trusting God in those moments of risk and change that actually he's so generous, isn't he? He's so good to us.
Yeah.
Once you know that it's, I know I have been blessed with knowing God in relationships. You've got that, the whole, I have peace, I have joy, I have love, I have forgiveness. And there's an area in which, like, if we all have encountered God, we all have the good news to share with others. But for what it looks like for me is going to be very different what it looks like for you. And you know, actually in Totten location where we've been encouraging people to you know, reach out to neighbours and stuff like that, it has like it's looked so different. And it's been scary. I think that's what you one of the bits was scary for me, because I felt like God had said to me about setting up an art club for people, like literally in the, you know, the streets that surrounded our house, and I just kept putting it off and off. And then it got to the night, and I remember just saying to Sim, just like, I just don't want strangers in my house, and you really do feel like I don't, and that's like say that's kind of like the costliness of it, and I think within 10-15 minutes I was absolutely loving it, but that's opened a door to now gather people and that stepping out in obedience. I don't necessarily know if that is going to be a blessing yet. So we've only had a couple, but I think it is taking this a little bit more. You almost have to take some steps and do something, don't you? Rather than
and I think like you referenced the stories that people have been sharing. The cost for some people has been putting their neck on the line at work and offering to pray for a colleague and risking, you know, being ostracised into a different part of the office or whatever, just because for sharing their faith, or being bold and joining a social club and a social group that, for people who are new to the area, or sharing parts of their own story that are really vulnerable and raw and still live, but actually are going to help them bless someone who's in the same situation. And I think it's that is really costly sometimes, but it's that fulfilling that mandate that we've all got of still seeing the whole of the earth filled with the glory of God, multiplying, not just through families getting bigger, but through sharing the gospel and seeing people come to know Jesus. And I think that Jesus modelled it to us, right? It is like he showed us just how costly it was. It cost him his life, and he loses everything on his way to the cross. But what he wins for us is pretty unbeatable. And I think it's that, I guess, weighing up the risk and reward as well for us is like, really do we, like, it's one of those rubber hits the road moments, isn't it? When we feel the little still small voice say, go and share your faith with that person, or go and encourage that person, and we you feel the push of it, but it's like, actually, what's the potential upside is huge. It's eternal life for someone who doesn't yet know Jesus, but we can so quickly sort of play that down and play up our own fears and anxieties, or like what it's going to cost us, whereas in reality, you put those two things on the scales and there's no no contest.
And I love the fact that even at the start of like a massive journey, right, as a church, where we're going through the whole Bible, spending a year and a half, whatever, looking through it all, in the very first book, where we get this massive picture of God, creator of everything, actually it's within the context of that book that we get to talk about how we, as his people, are part of the plan, and how we get to be a blessing, and how God's heart is to have a people that would be his, and that actually we get to play a part, and that, you know, it's amazing, isn't it? You might think that you give the whole of the first book just to tell us who God is, but actually we're part of it, and we're swept up into this story, which is so cool. So that's Genesis done. 1 done, 65 to go. Next week we're going to be in Exodus. We'll be joined by a few different people talking about that book. You can comment on these videos. You can let us know your questions. What would you like us to talk about? And we hope that these bless you and serve you.